It's a new Curve blog, and it's all about the Mega Man X series. And I'm joined by Ash Paulson to talk about it with me today. And that's the only section of that you're getting, but I don't want to torture you too much. Welcome everybody. So this is actually we're recording this at the time that normally a Curb Log would be coming out on a Saturday afternoon. However, I delayed by one day because at the time this is coming out, AGDQ has now finished. But of course, we're in the middle of the last day, and I figured I would wait until that had subsided. But joined by Ash Paulson for the first time in quite a while. Thanks for taking time out of a billion things to do, I'm sure.
No problem. Hey, thanks for having me. I always enjoy doing these, and no, this is the perfect time to do it. Where it's a nice breezy Saturday. So I actually just got done recording a Game Explain Real Talk with our good buddies Andre and Derek, and then I just pivoted right over into recording this exciting Curblog with you.
Yay! And it's about Mega Man X, and you are probably the biggest fan of this series that I know of personally. So I couldn't think of anybody better for this one. And it's funny. First of all, it's been quite a while. I think the last one we did was the Chrono Trigger one, which was like 2016. Like already, it's been that long now. And I got this. I got to give some credit. I got this question from somebody on YouTube. Tim Tamplin asked, "I'm actually curious about Curb's experience with Mega Man X, since he mentioned doing a Curb blog over in his Kingdom Hearts Curb blog, which you joined for that one
Yes.
also in 2016. That was 2 years ago now we did that. And his video over Mega Man Battle Network is what got me into the franchise. I'm curious about how he views one of the other Mega Man series. I definitely wanted someone who is far more educated than I am on this one, because I actually haven't played all of those. But Ash, for one thing, I'm sure these days people, know you best for Game Explain. And also, because, my God, it really has been a while. Now you're producing on Hive Swap, which is
Yes.
awesome, and I need to check that out. But you are quite involved with Mega Man on a lot of different levels. Do you want to educate any folks that don't know what things you've done in the Mega Man world for the fandom and officially?
Sure, yeah. So I've actually have been lucky enough to, kind of leave my mark on the franchise in an official capacity, and I did so. I spent a few years as Udon's senior editor, and Udon, of course, being a publisher and an art collective known for doing various video game art books, including Capcom art books, including Mega Man art books. So I basically got my start with Udon years ago, doing the original localized version of the Mega Man Zero official complete works, and that was like the first art book I ever edited. And did like localization work for. And then it's just kind of that turned into a full-time job with Udon eventually. So I got to work on the Mega Man Classic book, Mega Man X book, and then we eventually combined those into what people now know as Mega Man 25, MM25. So I got to do that book as well. And even though I'm not with Udon anymore, I'm still on retainer basically. So we're good buddies, and if Udon gets to do a Mega Man 11 art book, say, then I'm sure they would bring me back to edit that. I also, as part of Udon, also got to edit the Hitoshi Ariga's manga, the Mega Man Megamix and Mega Man Gigamix manga. So basically, if you go into the credits pages of any of those art books or manga, you'll see my name there as the senior editor. And it's been great. Yeah, it's a lovely thing to be able to leave your own mark on a property that you really just have so much passion for and care about so much. And I've been very lucky to be a fan who has gotten to kind of work on the series as well.
Yes, and I actually own several of those. In fact, the Zero art book was actually the Zero art book and the Battle Network one were both gifts given to me that I covet very. You know what? Actually, hold on. I have to call myself out on something, because now I'm remembering. In the era of which Ash speaks, I remember meeting him for the first time at New York Comic Con at the Udon booth, and we talked a little bit. Because I think I had heard you probably on like the Talking Tunes episode and some other stuff, and I think actually in the Mega Man Zero art book you mistakenly put Cubit Foxtar as a woman, even though they are actually a male.
Right.
So of
Yep.
course.
No, and
Yeah,
I remember I went back and forth. There was that, and there was also, God, what was the other one? There was another. No, I think that might have been for the Mega Man X book, but I remember going back and forth on between Gigavolt Man of War and Gigabolt Man of War for.
Oh, really?
And I just couldn't figure out which one it actually was. And I think I eventually got it right. But if you go online and you try to find that Maverick's true name, it's so many people disagree on whether it's actually Gigabolt or Gigavolt, and it's those are the kinds of things that when you're an editor, like, and that's why I'm glad I'm not editing anymore, because once you've edited enough art books with like 8-point text and on every page, it's like you get over it pretty quickly, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm ready to move on to something else, which is why I'm producing now. I'm very happy that I am, but. No, I look back on those days very fondly, and I actually remember that meeting, and it was not at the Udon booth. It was actually that was during my best time at Udon, which is when we were doing Shifty Look. So it was actually at the Shifty Look booth. And
Yes.
and those are my best years at Udon, because I got to not only edit books but also produce all this really cool stuff for Shifty Looks. So
Yes.
that was during that time, yeah.
Yeah, so if any of you guys have seen, Bravo Man
Yes.
and the Wonder Momo stuff, etc., from that point in time, that's right. God, and that was like, God, what? I don't even remember what year that was. That was so long ago.
Oh yeah, probably a good 5 years, 4 years at this point. Yeah.
Lord. So Megman. Okay, I actually want to start with you on this one because I'm sure your history with this predates mine. So, Mega Man X, the very first game on Super Nintendo. So I'm sure knowing you as an aficionado of just this entire franchise as a whole. I'm sure you played the crap out of the original NES games, the classic series, etc. So if you can go back that far, what were your initial memories of when X1 first came out on Super Nintendo?
I remember I must have been, let's see, probably 12 or 11 or so. I was the perfect age for Mega Man X to come out, the perfect age. And I remember, I think I first saw it on the cover of Nintendo Power back then. And of course, you see the box art with X in his first armor. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is Mega Man, but it's a new Mega Man, and it's so much cooler, and it looks so different. And I was excited for that as a kid could be excited for anything. And I was the perfect age. I was already into video games. I was into what Mega Man was, and X was just, a little older, a little cooler, a little edgier. And, when you're that age, that's what you're looking for. And I was just the perfect age to be ready for it. And I absolutely played the crap out of that game when it came out. And it's to this day, it is still my favorite 2D platformer of all time. I don't think that the genre has done better than the original Mega Man X. It is such a perfectly tightly designed experience. The way the game teaches you to play it. I always direct people to Egoraptor's video on Mega Man X's opening stage and on how the game teaches you to play it without actually teaching you. Like there's not a tutorial. There's no hints of a tutorial in Mega Man X, but all you need to do to learn to play that game is play through the opening stage, and it's perfect. And it just works. And, it's like, if you've been coming from the original Mega Man, Mega Man couldn't wall jump, so you wouldn't necessarily know that you can do that. So what does Mega Man X do? In the very first opening stage, it places you in a position where you have to wall jump to get out, so you just figure it out. You're in this giant chasm, and you're like, okay, well, I'm stuck. Mega Man can't jump on walls, so what am I going to do? And so you're kind of running around. Eventually, you're just going to try jumping against a wall, because what else are you going to do? And then the light bulb goes off, and it's like, oh my God, X can slide down walls, he can jump. Whoa! And suddenly, my brain exploded into this new concept of verticality. Suddenly, every wall could be scaled. Suddenly, you're not just going from left and right, you're going up and down, and it completely changed the game.
Are you? I'm actually curious. Before I lose this thought, are you hardcore enough that you can do like a Buster only run for Original X?
Oh, totally.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I could totally do a Buster only run. Actually, I did a random stream of the original Mega Man X. I can't remember when exactly it was, but I just did a random stream for Game Explained of the original Mega Man X, and I wasn't necessarily going for it, but I ended up doing a no death run, which is pretty cool. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I just accidentally got to show off that, hey, I am actually pretty hardcore at these games. I'm not necessarily a speedrunner. I'm not going to say that I can go pick up any Mega Man X game and go speedrun it and it's going to look amazing. Not at all. But specifically the SNES games, and I would say X4, I'm pretty damn good at and can, make look pretty good.
So I did a memories of the classic Mega Man series Curb blog on my own earlier this week, and I was telling a story about how I had a friend in Florida who had a Super Nintendo and a lot of games that I hadn't seen before, because I think I didn't even have a Super Nintendo yet. and he showed me Seven, Classic Seven, which I adore, and that's one of my
Nice.
favorite Mega Man games. But he also, if I'm remembering correctly, because this is like 20 plus years ago now, but I remember him showing me X and seeing that intro stage with the badass iconic music,
Oh
which
yeah.
is one of my favorite. I mean, without even being like a big X fan overall, like that's one of my favorite tracks from that series. And just think, wow, this is like so much different. And I want to go on record, by the way. I want to give myself a little bit of credit because when I saw Zero for the first time in that little opening cutscene where he saves your ass from Vile, I was able to immediately pick up that he was a guy.
Me too, actually. Yeah.
See, okay, because so many people I know who grew up with the game like when it first came out, because obviously like I don't even think Pokemon was airing yet. So like the anime, boom hadn't happened with the twofold strike of Pokemon and DBZ in succession, I think, yet. I don't think so. So, but like so that trope of like the pretty boy with the long blonde hair wasn't, I guess, quite as well known. But I don't know. I like both him and Slippy from Star Fox, the 64 version specifically with the girl voice. I never had that problem. I was always able to tell that. But so many people I know were like, "Oh no, I thought Zero was a girl with the boob lights and the red."
Yeah, same here. So many people I know, or like as a kid, they like so many of my friends or whomever thought Zero was a girl. And I'm like, he's not. Zero is totally a guy. He just has long blonde hair, and that was very vindicating. And Zero's a whole nother topic, and I do love how X1. I do love the hero's journey X goes through in that game because from very early on in the game, Zero is kind of placed as this figure that you were trying to live up to, and then you see that happen piecemeal, like as X gains power throughout the game, as you get all the heart tanks, but more than that, as you get all the armor pieces and you actually visually see this add to the character that you play, and you see X become as powerful and then more powerful than Zero by the end, or or later in the series, however you want to say it. It's so rewarding because you go from feeling weak and feeling like you're overwhelmed to feeling like you can demolish everything in the game. By the end, X is like a walking war machine, and I love that. I love the way that journey happens in the first game, and X1 was back before Zero became kind of a caricature. So like when Zero sacrificed himself and he dies at the end, it hurts. It feels weighty because that was before Zero was revived like 6 times. Before Zero dying became kind of a meme because he dies like in every game now.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I hate to even make this comparison because I know I'll get a lot of like, oh, how could you possibly? But I mean, it's funny. I detect certain similarities to a certain Sonic character, cough cough,
Yeah.
because it's hilarious to me that like, oh, in the game that he premiered in, he dies, and it's clearly intended that he was supposed to die and never come back, and then, oh, people really liked him. Yeah, we should probably bring him back. Whoops. Which is super ironic because in later years, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but was it not true that Zero was the original intended design for the Mega Man X character to begin with that Inafune created, I think?
Yeah, so and that was that kind of begins my issues with Inafune on the series. Of course, I'll always love Inafune for creating Mega Man and for what he's done to and for Mega Man. But yes, it's no big secret at this point. Zero has always been his baby. But what is also not a big secret, if you know me at all, is that I'm not, Zero's cool. I like Zero, but I got really sick of all the love of Zero because I'm an X fan. X is my favorite character of all time. I mean, I think together they make one of the coolest pairs in video gaming, like one of the most badass action pairs in all of gaming. But if it comes right down to it, I really got sick of all the spotlighting on Zero, and I just like, no, I really like X as a character. So I really got sick of Zero there for a while, and it drove me crazy that Inafune, considered Zero his baby and didn't want, basically X, he never designed X. X isn't his character. X was designed by someone else at Capcom, whom I also really like and appreciate for, giving X the spotlight. And basically how it went was he wanted Zero to be the main character, but Capcom's higher-ups weren't comfortable with this new red upstart character being the new Mega Man, because Mega Man was known as being the Blue Bomber. So they said, okay, you can have your red character, you can have Zero, but he's got to be the sidekick, and you've got to have a new normal, or at least a new, Mega Man that looks like Mega Man to be the main character here. And that's how X was born.
And it's funny, too, because if I'm also not mistaken, Inafune wasn't actually the artist that designed Mega Man himself, the character. So I
Right.
guess in a sense, it's almost like consistent with the fact that like even though he is like the father of the Mega Man franchise in terms of the amount of work that he put into it, like he's not actually the Dr. Lights to
Exactly.
Mega Man himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I'm curious too because I didn't even think to bring this up, but I want to talk briefly about. I was actually pretty, even as someone who did not own a PSP and never intended on buying one, I was kind of interested and excited about the prospect of them doing these remakes. Of course, there was the Powered Up for
Yes.
Classic, and then there was Maverick Hunter X. I have heard a lot of very polarizing things from people, though, for a lot of reasons about Maverick Hunter X, the X1 remake on PSP, which had, of course, some really cool animated cutscenes and the Day of Sigma OVA, which I love.
Me too.
But also, I remember a particular criticism, and I don't remember who this came from, because this is probably going back a long time, but I remember people being kind of upset about because like you're bringing up the stuff about the the hero's journey with X and in tandem with what he learns from Zero as kind of the character that he looks up to and everything from the Maverick Hunters and all that, but them adding like Zero as a playable character in the game and then also having like the Vile mode, which changes a lot of like Vile's backstory or whatever. A lot of people I know who were like big X fans were actually kind of upset about some of those things. Was like, and I don't know enough of like the grand scheme of the lore of everything to really get it. But was that something that that at the time it because that was years ago that came out? Did that have any kind of like negative or positive effect on you when that one came out?
I love Maverick Hunter X, and it had a positive effect on me. I mean, excuse me, it had a totally positive effect on me because it was a different take on the origin story, and I wanted to see them, complete all the other remakes because the original plan was for them to remake the entire series like that. But unfortunately, the PSP didn't really have much of a foothold in America at the time, and people weren't turning out to buy PSP games, let alone Mega Man games on PSP. So, excuse me, I'm kind of getting over a cold, so a bit of a
It's
cough.
okay. I'll find it in my black heart to forgive you for dying. How dare you?
Yeah.
It's just
So, but no, I mean, it changes things about the origin story for sure. So, for example, Dr. Kane, who survives until at least X3 and in the original series, basically dies in the OVA Day of Sigma in Maverick Hunter X, which a lot of pissed a lot of people off. But I don't get that. To me, though, that's kind of like people having their old men yelling at the sky at the clouds moments. It's like, okay, what's the point of a remake if you're going to make it to be the exact same thing it was before? Why not play with it a little bit? It doesn't take away from the original. Maverick Hunter X doing things a little differently doesn't suddenly mean the original Mega Man X doesn't exist. My cartridge is still sitting right here next to me. I can go play it anytime I want. So, yeah, I kind of like the creative liberties that Maverick Hunter X took with it. Plus, I also like how Maverick Hunter X refocused things on X again, because that came out at the time when, again, the spotlight had been very much on Zero in games like X5 and X6, and I was getting kind of tired of it. So I found it to be very refreshing that Maverick Hunter X came out, and it didn't really glorify Zero. In fact, Zero actually was not playable in Maverick Hunter X. The only two playable characters were X and Vile. And they even actually changed certain things to make it so that X wasn't quite the weakling he seemed to be in the original first game, like such as with Vile. He beats Vile fair and square in the opening stage in Maverick Hunter X. He just gets too close to him because he thinks he's won, and then Vile grabs him while he's not paying attention. So, it takes certain liberties with it. It messes with the locations of all the power ups, especially the armor upgrades. So, if you're coming from the original game and you immediately go into Chill Penguin stage, you're gonna have a rough time because guess what? The foot upgrade is not in Chill Penguin stage anymore. So that kind of stuff, and I found it fun, and I thought the remixed soundtrack was phenomenal. I really loved the way the music was handled. I thought it looked great, and it gave us a whole nother game of Mark frickin' Gatha, who is the best. He is X, and I'm so sad that he went to go become a doctor in Poland or Norway or wherever, because
if that's even what happened.
If that is even what happened, good point.
Because I've become friends in recent years with Lucas Skilbertson, who's the voice of Zero, or was the voice of Zero in those games, and I think that actually like he and some of the other like the Blue Water actors like aren't even entirely sure what happened with Mark Gatha, to be honest.
That's so weird.
I'm not sure. But it's Yeah, actually, it's kind of a bummer because I was the guy that did Sigma in Dave Sigma was great. However, I was kind of sad that it was not Dave Petit, who was Master Asia on G Gundam, to be the Master Asia to Mark Gatha's
Oh
X
yeah.
Domon Kashu, because I just adored that about X8, which I'll get to that later. But I guess kind of moving to the next one. Well, so sadly, oh, you know what? Actually, here, real quick, last thing about the original game. So I didn't actually get to play through the entirety of the first game itself until I got to get a copy of X Collection on GameCube, which because I played the hell out of Anniversary Collection at the time. That was my way of getting to play a lot of the other classic games that I had just missed on my NES back in the day, because I only had 2 and 6 at the time. But I was intending originally to play all 6 of the originals, and then I only got as far as a little bit into 2. So unfortunately, my only real experience with 2 is just like the first couple levels. I do know the infamous, poor green bike
Green
guy
biker
who
dude
just dies
Yeah.
inexplicably.
Unceremoniously in the intro. I love it.
Poor motherfucker.
I know.
But I think at the time I had, oh, you know what? A funny story. I had a girlfriend at the time who gifted me the Mega Man Zero art book that
nice.
you worked on. And she was a far bigger fan of X than I was. So I think actually, as kind of a gift in return, I was like, you know what? She'll appreciate this a lot more than I do. So I gave her my copy of X Collection. This is like years and years and years ago. But so sadly, I don't know much of anything about X2.
Okay.
But if you have anything to share on that one, otherwise, please.
Oh, X2, I mean, basically takes on, picks up right where X1 left off. I believe it takes place 6 months after, and it literally feels like a direct sequel. I mean, you can pick it up after having played X1 and feel right at home. And it started a trend which we would see returning in other games, which is even though X loses his power-ups from game to game, Capcom very wisely decided, hey, he shouldn't lose his dash, because the dash is what makes X X. That's what really sets these games apart from the classic series, even more than wall jumping is that dash move. And so yeah, from X2 on, X would always begin every game with the dash, and the foot upgrade would then upgrade that dash even more. In this case, X2, he got an air dash, which is really cool. And then so X2 was basically, X1, just more of it. It's not as good. It's definitely not as tightly designed, but I think X2 is still a great game. The soundtrack definitely took a turn from being kind of like prog rock style in X1 to the more kind of electronic, synthy, techno-ish in X2, which was also an interesting change. I think X2 also has a great soundtrack, and X2 really is just, it's more great Mega Man X, and as in the 16-bit style, and you've got these new villains in the X Hunters. You got Violin, Surgis, and Agile, and they're basically they're the X Hunters, so they hunt X is literally what they do. Kind of on the nose, but and of course, ultimately at the very end, you figure out that they are actually working for Sigma, who has been manipulating things from the background all along, and that is something we're going to see happen many more times.
Yes,
in the X series.
I to be fair, to give Zero a little bit of a break, I think Sigma has come back to life more times than he has in total. So he's certainly got that going for him a little bit. But. And
in terms of Zero and X2, I did really like Zero's presence in this, because you get the sense that they weren't sure if Mega Man X was going to take off, so they killed off Zero. Not exactly intending to bring him back, but then, of course, as you said, Zero ended up being a fan-favorite character. And they did what they... Really, the only thing they could have done, if you really want to appeal to, like, those really cool anime shonen instincts in kids at the time, which was you bring him back, but you got to put him back together, but if you don't put him back together, guess what? He comes back, and then you have to fight him, and that's even cooler.
Oh, no.
But then what's even cooler, though, is if you do put him back together, the Zero that you don't fight actually ends up being a black colored Zero, which is that kind of ended up being its own cool thing in the fandom. And so I do love that even back then in X2, in the early days of the series was kind of experimenting with 2 different story paths. Obviously they don't diverge that much, either you fight Zero or you don't, but it was still a pretty cool idea, and it gave the game some replay value. And getting those Zero parts from the X Hunters, because you have to actually win them in optional fights, those fights can be pretty hard if you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. See, and I think actually, you know what? I do know there was one particular track from 2, which I think is the intro level, that was stuck in my head because this is a little off topic, but there were a lot of like Flash games on Newgrounds, like Mega Man ones,
yeah.
and somebody made one of Fireman, and it used the X2 intro stage theme.
I remember this actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And I played that extensively just because I think just that was my era of like just playing everything on Newgrounds that I could find. And so I remember, I think years later when I actually got Anniversary Collection and that theme played, I was like, oh, it's this one or whatever. And then same thing with, I think it's the You Beat the Boss one, is the da-da-da-da-da-da,
Yeah, that's
that
X2.
one. Yeah, I know that one because of this, and I've mentioned this on many Kerr blogs, this like Java-made like Kirby fan game that was on like Kirby's Rainbow Resort a long time ago, because they had that as like the little intro sequence for it. It's very weird connections, but like, so I have kind of like a phantom connection to X2's soundtrack in a different kind of way, oddly. So moving on to X3. Also have not played this one, but I do have a story about this one. So, and I want to say either like late middle school or early high school, I had a friend who had a lot of the X games for PlayStation. At the time, I didn't have a PlayStation yet at all. And he used to make like little, I guess, sort of movies, but really it was just like, early kind of editing without a computer program. He recorded a full playthrough of his copy of X3. Which the PlayStation version has the little animated intros of each of the Mavericks when they show up the first time, or I forget if it's the intro or when they actually like you're about to fight them or something.
No, it's the intro. It's the stage intro. Like when you select them
gotcha.
from the stage select screen, you get that intro animation.
Yeah, and so he included all those, and I was like, oh, this is cool, and I don't recall what was happening in the story of it because that was my only ever time I'd seen anything of X3, but I do also remember him having as a little cute like extra thing at the end is he like put the intro to X4 as almost like a teaser for like the next game.
Oh, that's
which
cool.
I'll get to that. But yeah, that's all I know about X3. So anything to share on that one then?
Actually, yeah. Well, and I to go back to X2 really quick, just because we were talking about the story, and one of the coolest things that X2 did. X2 was actually the first game to message the impending plot twist that Zero was actually created by Dr. Wily. The last thing Sigma says after you beat him in X2 is, I don't understand why this is happening. Why would Zero fight against us? He is the last of the Doctor's creations. So as a kid, I'm like, the Doctor, what? What does that mean? And you wouldn't really find out what that meant until X4 or Mega Man 2, the Power Fighters, depending on, what part of the series you're playing. But so going into X3, you already have that twist in your mind at the end of X2, like, okay, so where's Zero from really? And then so you go to X3, and X3, I like X3. I would say it's the least approachable of the Super Nintendo X games, and it's certainly the hardest. It's by far the most difficult of the Super Nintendo X games, and I would say it approaches collectathon mentality a little too closely. There's maybe a little bit too much to collect in X3, but on the other hand of that, it gives it a ton of replayability, and a typical playthrough of X3 lasts much longer than a playthrough of X1 or X2. So depending on your taste, that could be a good or a bad thing. In terms of the story, X3 basically introduces a new character who ends up being a villain named Dr. Doppler. And Dr. Doppler has basically, he has helped quell the Maverick uprising. He's been able to stop the Mavericks from breaking out and causing all this havoc. And he has established his own little utopia town called Doppler Town. But sure enough, Maverick outbreaks start happening in Doppler Town, and then things start going haywire. So X and Zero are called in to, take care of Dr. Doppler and stop the outbreak of Mavericks happening in Doppler Town. And, of course, yet again, by the end, you find out that Dr. Doppler has been infected by what we now know as the Sigma virus. And that is something that X3 should get credit for, is that it actually was the game to introduce the concept of Sigma really being a virus and not a physical body. And that really Sigma can be anything. He's a virus and can inhabit various bodies. And so eventually you find out that Doppler has been building this horrific battle body for the Sigma virus to inhabit. And that is essentially what happens in X3.
And I'm actually curious because what Ash was referring to before about the little hint in the Mega Man Power Battles or Fighter game is
right.
if you beat the story mode for one of them with bass, there's a little hint about how he's creating a incredibly powerful new robot that is even stronger than base that will, which I think this was also the beginning of this long-standing, theory that the fandom had about how like the classic series timeline ended by, Zero killing, a classic Mega Man, and like also further people exaggerating by, and then he murdered the whole Light family and etc. or whatever, which has been debunked for some time now.
Exactly.
But I do wonder, because I don't know the exact dates of when everything came out, because I guess 8 wasn't even a thing by that time. But I do wonder, were there any further hints about the Wily connection in X3 as well, or not really?
Well, no, not in X3 specifically, but there is, again, X3 ends on that cliffhanger ending where basically X, it gives you a kind of a look into X's inner thoughts and his monologue, like all the Super Nintendo X games do at the end. And this one says very tantalizingly, X realizes that in order to, I don't remember the exact wording, but in order to end the war and in order for there to be peace, X is going to have to defeat his best friend, Zero. So the game sets up the fact that X and Zero are going to have to fight, but they don't really give you any context as to why, and that wouldn't really be further explored until X4 and mainly X5. But I do like, though, that I like to highlight this stuff because a lot of people consider platformers as like a genre that naturally has to be story averse. Like, it's just a platformer, it's not going to have a good story. And extrapolating that further, Mega Man, they're like, Mega Man, it's just, you don't care about Mega Man's story, and most people don't, and that's fine. But I like to highlight this stuff because, if you look and if you're invested, it is kind of cool that these games were setting up plot points that would actually be fulfilled later on. So there is a story here that matters if you care about it. And I think a lot of people who aren't really into Mega Man kind of forget that.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, this was a time when, Capcom was producing, like, multiple Mega Man games.
Yeah.
And, by that point, at least 3. No, actually, I forget if Trigger, God, Legends was even out. No, probably not.
Legends came out in 97, I think. 90. Yeah, I think it's 97. Yeah.
That was before. Was that before or after X4? I don't remember. Was that after the 10th anniversary, I think?
Oh man, I think X4 came out in 98, so I think Legends came out slightly before that, but
okay.
I don't have all the release dates in front of me, so I'm sure there are a bunch of hardcore Mega Man fans like, who's this asshole you got on here? It's
I know,
this asshole
right,
Ash Paulson, you said he knows his shit, and he doesn't know anything, so I apologize.
But, no, me too. I either way. But either way, like, the point really I was getting to is that by that point, there were multiple installments to this, which was, exciting. And, not a thing that happens nearly as much now, like with a lot of different franchises. I mean, sometimes there's several years between when a new one will come out. And, with at the time, especially because these, little fun Mega Man, like formulaic Mega Man platformers were easy enough to produce basically once every year. It was kind of cool because it was almost like, it's the newest episode of this show that I'm following.
Exactly.
Especially when you're a kid and you're not as jaded about everything, and it's like, I'm invested into this, and like, sure, I would love story in my platformer, absolutely. And because even though like I was always kind of on the outside looking in for the X series, like, because I kind of went straight past that and then got into Zero, which I did a whole separate Kerblog about that a long time ago.
Nice.
But that was kind of my jumping on point of like, like really cool in-depth stories for Mega Man games, because I wasn't much used to that in Classic, but I always knew friends that were bigger into X, throughout school and everything. Mm-hmm. So I was always kind of like semi-aware of like general things about like the universe. I knew who all like the major characters were, of course. There are some that I'm just like, who is Cygnus? What does he do? I'll get to him later.
Uh-huh.
But okay, X4. Here we are.
Actually, really quick though, just
sure.
Interject really quick. I'm not going to mention these because they're not particularly noteworthy story-wise, but Mega Man Extreme actually does get slotted in between X2 and X3. And then Mega Man Extreme 2 takes place between X3 and X4. And the one thing it's notable for is that Extreme 2 actually introduces Iris. That's
right.
Yeah, so
That's right.
Extreme 2 is actually the earliest game in the timeline to feature Iris. And it features Iris as I think she's like a junior navigator who's just getting to know Zero, and she looks up to him. So you see actually the beginnings of what would become their relationship in X4.
So, okay, I've got a story to tell about X4
All right.
that might be a little different from everybody else's. Okay, so many other Kerr blogs I've talked about. There was this store called Collector's Kingdom that was in like nearby where I lived in Long Island, and they sold rentable bootleg tapes of fan subbed DBZ and Dragon Ball GT episodes. GT wasn't even remotely close to coming out in the U.S., so that was also like, oh, cool, new Dragon Ball, and I'm not smart enough to know that this is terrible because it's GT, but nonetheless. In fact, I still have it, but I own GT legally, so nobody give me any shit for that. I own the entire GT series. Yes, I know, I'm disgusting. Nonetheless, I have a fan-subbed tape of the last couple episodes of GT, and on these tapes were all of the Japanese commercials kept on board because they were just literally people taped them as they were airing in Japan.
Yeah.
And would fan sub them. And I remember seeing a commercial for X4. This was for when it was the 10th anniversary. So I believe that X4 and I think maybe another game were both released
8.
for...
Probably Mega Man 8.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Classic 8. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, yes, because they both had the same animation style for the
Right.
Infamous now cutscenes, but not known to me because... and I don't know if you've ever, like, just, for shits, hunted down this commercial, but so there was a commercial for X4... Japanese commercial, and it had the intro thing. Oh, actually, yeah. Hardcore TTA fans, I'm talking directly to my most nerdy of audience, Ash. Excuse me for a minute.
No, please.
Hardcore TTA fans who are familiar with the song Makenai ga Kito, I think is the name of it.
I think it's Makina Aiga, like Kita Aru or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Japanese intro theme to Mega Man X4 was the ending credits theme that I used for TV Tome Adventures, like in the early 2000s. Shoutouts, by the way, again to Silva Gunner for doing a little nod to that recently. Nonetheless, so that was where I became familiar with that song, and years later, on like some site, I tracked down a copy of it, and it was like, oh my god, I remember this. But also in this commercial, they had gameplay footage, and they showed a lot of bits of the cutscenes, the fully animated, very cool looking, 90s era anime cutscenes, which I love that aesthetic.
Yeah.
And flat out, they just have the scene where Iris dies in the commercial.
Did they really?
And they show Zeros doing the scream and, like clutching her, and it's like beautifully performed. And I'm like, oh my god, dude! I knew X was cool, and I've been missing out, but like, god damn, this looks awesome. And of course, they have the classic Capcom at the end of the commercial.
Right.
So then, flash forward a few years later, this same friend of mine at the time who taped me that little playthrough of X3 gives me a tape of just all of the cutscenes of Mega Man X4. Now, this is early high school, so by this point in time, and this says a lot about me considering what I do now. By this time, I was learning about the voiceover industry, and I was learning about the idea of censorship on the Saturday morning types of cartoons. I think by that point, Mega Man NT Warrior was airing on TV, and I was learning about the changes made to things and blah 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 whatever. But I was also beginning to understand the prospect of good voice acting and bad voice acting.
This was the early days of PS1 localization for sure.
Yes, and of course, because I didn't grow up with a PlayStation, I also didn't experience this era where this very too long of an era where Capcom was like, why don't we just get voice actors that speak English that live in Japan to do the English versions of our games, like Resident Evil is probably far more infamous even than X4 is, which that's saying something. But yeah, so I popped it, and of course, this is early internet too, so there was no YouTube, there was no memes were kind of in a very different form. So I just popped in this videotape, see these cutscenes, and I'm like, oh wow.
Yeah.
and the sad thing is, I've still, I think maybe when I had Anniversary Collection, I think I tried playing like one level of X4, but I was like, nah, I want to wait until I get up to it. And then I didn't finish X2, so I didn't get up that point. Now with the, eventual Virtual Console and re-releases of the X series happening within this year, that may change, so we'll see. But nonetheless, yeah, I have only ever seen basically those cutscenes, and I have absolutely no idea what is happening in between any of those things. I don't know what the heck happened with Double. I'm assuming he died. I don't know why Sigma was back. I don't know what General's deal was. I don't know why Colonel and Zero were so pissed off and Repliforce and blah, blah, blah. I don't know why Iris suddenly, I know that she like gets a mech suit and then fights Zero for some, I guess because he killed Colonel, like vague thing, and then he has to kill her, and it's tragic. Like very vague things that I just know by proxy through these cutscenes and seeing sprite sheets, I think, online or whatever. Like, so there's all these holes that I've had for Mega Man X4 for like 15 years that are just very surreal, but that's my experience with that game.
Well, you know, it's funny. Like looking back, X4 actually had a surprisingly grown-up story. Like it was actually it dealt with themes that are salient even today, even if it did it in kind of a dumb, haphazard anime way. It still did it, and I would say if I'm summarizing it very quickly, basically X4 revolves around basically what is this state or this nation of independent Reploids called Repliforce, and basically they are a military force of all Reploids, and they want to establish a nation by and for Reploids, so they can live apart from their human creators. And unfortunately, the Maverick Hunters see this as a declaration of having gone Maverick, when really they were a peaceful separatist nation. Literally, all they wanted to do was separate and kind of go their own way, and the Maverick Hunters were forced to basically deem them Mavericks and take them out anyway. And of course now Sigma was behind the scenes kind of manipulating both sides into wanting to fight each other anyway. So there were certain things that Sigma did that made it look to the Maverick Hunters like Repliforce was more violent than they actually were. So if Sigma hadn't actually gotten involved, maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. But essentially it was about the idea of various political parties looking at this one separatist nation in different ways. And, for a Mega Man game, that's pretty heavy stuff. And so looking back on X4, it actually, I think, had a pretty great story, even if, it was kind of bogged down by some anime nonsense. But essentially what happens is, Colonel and General are the leaders of the Repliforce, and Iris is Colonel's sister. And, obviously, in the midst of doing their jobs, X and Zero are forced to defeat Colonel and General, and depending on whose story you're going through, Zero, either X or Zero will defeat them, and if Zero defeats Colonel, naturally Iris, even though she is in love with Zero, has to get revenge on him because he killed her brother. So that's essentially what's going on, and you find out at the end, of course, too, that General is actually a very peaceful Reploid. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. He doesn't want to hurt humans. And when he finds out that Sigma has fooled him and repurposed one of their weapons into basically I think it's like an orbital satellite laser type thing that's just going to start destroying everything, he sacrifices his own body to destroy it, because he's like, hey, X is Zero, I never wanted to hurt anybody. We just wanted to separate. And unfortunately, Repliforce is ultimately destroyed for just wanting to be a separatist nation. And it's actually kind of sad. And it really, by the end of the day, not only the player, but X and Zero are left questioning, well, did they really do the right thing? And are the Maverick Hunters, are they always doing the right thing? Because in X4, it's easy to argue that they really didn't do the right thing.
Right. So X and Zero are kind of like stuck on an icky job, as perhaps Axel would describe.
And then, and also X4 is the first game to play with the idea of X being able to go Maverick. And so, one of the cooler moments in X's ending, unfortunately, despite the voice acting, which that was one of the things that X4 got wrong. Whoever was in charge of the casting for X4, again, this is the early days of game localization, and they didn't really realize that X and Mega Man are in fact different characters. So they brought Ruth Shiraishi back, who did Mega Man, and I thought, is obviously okay. The voice acting in 8 wasn't great, but I actually thought Ruth's voice for Mega Man was on the mark. Mega Man is supposed to sound like a kid. He's not supposed to sound like you or me, like he does in some of the cartoons and the localized cartoons. He's supposed to sound like a kid.
Yeah. And like he may or may not sound in Mega Man 11.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I'm hoping we'll get a
Sorry,
Japanese voice
go ahead.
for that
Yeah,
one.
But, seriously.
Yeah, but unfortunately, they brought Ruth back for X, and so X sounds like a little kid like Mega Man, and it doesn't work at all. But what does work is the script, and X kind of talks about the idea of potentially going Maverick, and he's like, hey, Zero, if I ever go Maverick, I need you to take care of me. And for Zero's part, this is, again, by the way, X4 was the debut of Zero as a full playable character. You could play as him in stages in X3, but this is when he debuted as a full playable character. And his story deals with his origin, and of course, this is a game where most people found out that Zero was created by Dr. Wily. So you have this really cool interplay of, wow, what is Dr. Wily's final creation going to have to, is Dr. Light's final creation going to go Maverick, and then Zero has to say, what's going to happen? And X5 answered those questions, but X4 really, yeah, it played with some really cool ideas that the series would go on to explore further.
Yeah, it's I remember when watching that little video my friend made for me, the both like Zero's story, which I think was the second thing on the tape, because I think he showed all of X's and all of Zero's cutscenes. I remember like that little thing where Wily comes in and it's the silhouette of Wily. It was like, oh wait, is that? Because I didn't know that was the whole deal with him yet.
Yeah.
And then the little origin bit where he wakes up and he just like fucking ransacks these poor guys, and Sigma comes out and he's like, I want that Maverick studied and all that. I was like, oh wow, okay. So despite the things about it, I did still get like something cool out of just seeing like this more in-depth part of the story, because especially by that point I was getting really really into trying to watch a lot of different anime beyond just the stuff that was on TV. And this is because I still didn't have a PlayStation, so this was like this whole other world that I was kind of missing of stuff. Funnily enough, I don't know if you'd ever heard anything about this like back in the day. I feel like maybe I heard this rumor on like Planet Mega Man or like Mega Man Network or something, like one of those sites. I'm sure of which most of those are probably still active, but when Anniversary Collection was being made, I remember hearing some rumor that they actually might have been considering redubbing the cutscenes of the later games in the X Collection, which I guess is just 4, 5, and 6,
Right.
with the cast of X8, which I was like, oh, I hope that would be nice.
So, as I understand it, the full context for that was that initially the plan was for them to remake the entire series, like they remade Maverick Hunter X, and they were going to remake all the way up through Maverick Hunter, at least X6. And initially, they were supposed to redub the cutscenes for those releases, but then the Maverick Hunter series got shelved and was never going to be finished. So then they pivoted to there was always this uncertain kind of like vague rumor that they pivoted from putting those redubs in the Maverick Hunter games into the Anniversary Collection. And then for whatever reason, though, that just didn't happen. And as I understand it, the reason was very flimsy, was that they wanted them to be as close to the original experiences as possible, which is bullshit. But I don't know exactly what happened, but I think, that was going to happen. Then unfortunately, and it's still one of my biggest gaming disappointments that it never happened, but it just never materialized, because I was excited to see X5 and X6 translated properly, because those games were notoriously awful in their localization.
Well, I will say, and I'm sure you've probably seen this, but massive shout outs to the, I guess only technically a fan dub, but by the official voice, Lucas Gilbertson did a dub of a couple scenes from X4, particularly the infamous "What Am I Fighting For?"
Yes, I've seen those.
And the fight with Colonel, which that made me very happy. He's a great guy, and he really in fact, actually, well, I'll get to giving him some props later on when we get to X8. But I actually want to talk about X5 for a second. So. I think I actually have a very different experience with this one than other people do, because so I had some kind of gaming magazine. Maybe it might have been Tips and Tricks or something. It was one that's like that, did not last as long as like Nintendo Power or whatever, but it had a full expose on X5, and I think even like the cover had like him and Zero and Alia and all them on it, and it was a full entire walkthrough of the game. And something about the look of X5, for some reason, I saw this and I was like, this one. I've never been like so like interested to want to pick up an X game, but I kind of want to get this one. So I went out and I actually picked up X5, and by that point I had a PlayStation. So I played through it, and I had that player's guide, and I never finished it because the absolute bane of my existence, the goddamn devils. Devil enemies, the Black Devil, which that's the worst name ever.
I think it's Shadow Devil, actually.
Oh, is it?
I think
Okay.
it is, which is a little less bad.
Yeah. But yeah, that thing was just so, because I thought like, I mean, granted I could get through the Mega Man 1 with the infamous, pausing trick or whatever, but I could not kill that thing. So I was never able to fight. I saw pictures of it in the magazine, but I was never able to get up to the final Sigma fight in X5. So I had this kind of bitter like, man, but I remember really liking, and of course also X5, as I learned later, I didn't even get the reference when I read the instruction manual, but I learned later, of course, is the one that semi-infamously, I guess people kind of love it or hate it, had the, Guns N' Roses name change.
I hated that so much. I made that a point. I hated those names so much that I made it a point in the Mega Man X art book for Udon to make sure that the original Maverick names got in there alongside the Guns N' Roses names, because I was like, no, we are not going to refer to these Mavericks only as their damn Guns N' Roses names in this book. I refuse. I'm the editor on this book. I'm putting my foot down. I'm making a power play. I hated those damn names.
No, if I were in a position like that, I would probably do the exact same.
Yeah, I had such I hated it. Duff McWhalen and Squid Adler. And get out of here.
Duff McWhalen's my favorite, just because I'm just like, because with the other ones, I'm like, all right, I can at least see like, oh, but this will be cool or whatever.
Yeah.
But like Duff McWhalen, I'm like, fucking, come on, really?
Get out of here. I hated that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but actually, it's funny because I remember when I read through the Battle Network art book, I'm like, oh man, the nightmare they must have had to go through with like, okay, which name are we using because of all the different ones that happened between like the show changed names for characters for some reason a lot. Then there were the game versions. Sometimes there were multiple game versions depending on the spelling or whatever. Yeah. So I don't envy that nightmare. Nonetheless. X5, but I remember, and I've heard from people that it and X6 are kind of like not super loved, but I remember really liking X5.
Yeah.
But I don't know how it holds compared to other ones, etc.
I mean, I think the problem with X5 was that it followed up X4, which is widely considered to be among the best Mega Man X games, along with the first one. Like, most fans will tell you the first and the fourth game are the best. Like, most people will there are a few outliers who prefer some of the other games, but for me, the problem with 5 was that it followed up 4, and it was in every way 4, but just not nearly as good, in my opinion. And I mean, like, it was just the graphics were a little worse, and this was after a 4-year gap. This was like the original Mega Man gap. Like, some people forget that there was initially quite a large gap between Mega Man X, it was 1996 or 7 when X3 came out, and it wasn't until 2001, I think, that I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. 97 is when X4 came out, and then 2001 is when X5 came out. So that was like quite a gap there. And so I remember being really excited about X5, thinking, oh my god, I thought this series that I loved as a kid was just kind of unofficially gone. But no, they're bringing it back, and they're continuing the story, and hell yeah, and they're going to finally tell us what that meant about X and Zero having to fight each other. So, and hey, one of the good things I'll say about X5 was that it made good on that promise. Like, I don't think the game is that great, but it's also not bad. It's just fine. But in terms of the story value, X5 was meant to be the last game in the series originally, and you can tell because of the way it ends. It's very somber. It's very final. And I remember thinking that at the time, too. I actually very, very vividly remember how I felt after first finishing X5, like thinking, wow, this is actually really sad and kind of somber. Like, is this the end? And it kind of felt like the end, and it wasn't. But of course, I later found out that it was supposed to be, and it makes so much sense that it should have been. And,
right, of course, which then leads into, now, did Mega Man 1 come out between X5 and X6? Was that what happened, I think?
That was supposed to be the case, but then I think, X6, I believe, came out first because they wanted to capitalize on the success, or they may have come out in the same year, because I think X6 came out in 2002, but I think Zero might have as well. So, yeah, but they came out very close to one another, which caused so much confusion, because here you have Zero beginning this entire new story that's supposed to have gone straight from him being in stasis or being, destroyed at the end of X5, and suddenly now he's back and I hid myself so I could repair myself in X6, which is just the flimsiest, most dumbass excuse for Zero coming back ever. And so basically what it was, it was Capcom execs wanting to capitalize on the success of the franchise, which went directly against the narrative wishes of Inafune and company. So it made things very confusing, but, X5, I don't think it was a great game. I do like that it introduced the idea of having multiple armors for X, so you could basically collect power-up parts from 2 different sets of armor for X, and I thought that was cool, and I like that you had different mechanics for those armors. So, I think in X5 it was the Falcon armor and the Gaia armor. So, I did like that it did that, but everything else about it was just like, it was X4 but not as good. It didn't look as good. The soundtrack wasn't as good. Really, the level designs were across the board worse than X4, and really the only lasting value in my opinion that X5 has, apart from just being a fine game, is its story value.
See, it's funny too because kind of leading into I know little to nothing about X6 at all, other than X has a sword, and people don't like that one very much. But it's interesting how I'm thinking about, especially with, I know that of course you're a big Kingdom Hearts aficionado as well.
Yes.
How the X series, I guess in that way, kind of prepped you for what I often joke about in when you follow the lore of a series like that, whether it's games or movies or a show or whatever, where it's like, yes, there's a in-universe answer to a question, and then there's also the out-of-universe answer to a question, which very often the answer will be, well, that character is really popular, so therefore this decision, because I got into Zero, not to go too onto that topic, but I got into Zero, the Zero series, and with enough of my knowledge of the X series, got what was supposed to be happening, and I thought that was a really, really cool direction they went in.
Me too.
And then finding out later that it was like not quite retcon, but sort of like, well, we're gonna make these adjustments because, and it's kind of a bummer because this was still in the era of like, we're making 1 billion Mega Man games, we have multiple series running all at the same time.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff matters as opposed to now where it's like, well, we may of course have a comeback happening, but it just ultimately it's like, and then it just kind of wound up being, then the X series didn't finish, and then at least like that's kind of why I kind of am glad that Zero really is one of the only that got a proper finish in the way that it was designed. Well, I mean, there's not enough material to do a ZX Kerblog, and I don't see myself doing that because I've never even played those. Anyway,
Sure.
But nonetheless, so I guess X6, like knowing by that point, kind of the curtain lifted up on how everything was working, was it still interesting? And I mean, I guess also I don't know much about 7 either, other than burn to the ground, burn to the ground, burn to the ground. That's literally all I know about X7. I guess by that point, I'm curious to you because like you were following these, I'm sure, as they came out. Was there ever any kind of like doubt and like, oh no, is this series like, are bad things happening? Is it going downhill? Is the story getting a little bit too all over the place? Like, was there any kind of like worry at that time?
Oh, 100%. I remember as excited as I was for X6 because, remember, there had been such a large gap between X4 and 5 that when they very quickly announced X6, I was like, oh, awesome. Okay, this series is back. We're back in it. We're going to start getting X games pretty often again, and I don't really know how they're going to follow up on this ending, because again, the ending for X5 felt very final to me, and I was like, okay, well, they X and Zero, they both have run their natural courses. Zero, he's got his hero sacrifice, and X is the hero who lives, and he really had to be. That's just the way it had to be, and it made good on the promise of providing context for why they needed to fight. And still, one of the greatest moments of my childhood, adolescent gaming history is that X and Zero fight when they're fighting against the Dr. Wily logo, and you got that badass X versus Zero song, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is what I've been building up to since the original X game. This is what I've been waiting for forever. And as much as I think X5 is just kind of an okay game, I do give it credit for delivering on on those story beats. And then X6 just kind of, I mean, X6 is just kind of assy. It's not good. Like the level design is atrocious. It tried to bring back this idea of, like, one of the coolest things about the original Mega Man X was that depending on which, like, the order you played the stages in, some stages would affect other stages. Like if you beat Storm Eagle, then Spark Mandrill's stage will be affected in certain ways, and that goes for other Mavericks as well. X6 tried to do the same thing, but it did it in these artificial ways where, like, okay, if you beat this one Maverick, then you go to this other stage and it'll be raining the whole time. It'll be acid rain. It'll be losing health the whole time. Or you won't be able to see any of the screen except for these, like, little spotlights going, and it just makes it harder. And it's like, that's not the kind of organic level design conceit that I wanted out of Mega Man X. And so X6 just took things in this weird direction. The story was just, it was tacked on. It was some nonsense about how they found Zero's DNA in the wreckage of the Eurasia space crash. Eurasia, of course, being the space station that Sigma infects in X5. And so it's something about, it's like, Zero's DNA, they find it in the Eurasia wreckage, and then there's something about this new Reploid named Gate who wants to use Zero's DNA to become more powerful. And then he has this whole he has the investigate he has this whole team of investigators who are investigating what is known as the nightmare phenomenon, which is like these purple viral forms of Zero that are going around and causing problems. And it's just a mess. It's a mess. None of it needs to happen. It's ridiculous. You do have this one character who works with Gate named Isaac, who may or may not be Dr. Wily in a robot body, which, again, I don't know why they decided to introduce that plot point.
I don't even know about that.
Yeah, well, because they did that in X2, because one of the X-Hunters in X2, Surgis, it was very heavily hinted that there may be an element of Dr. Wily inside him, whether it's an AI, because he knows things about Zero that really no Reploid from that generation should know. Then fast forward to X6, and you have this other Surgis-like character who, Surgis again looked kind of like a crazy mad scientist, but as a robot. Same thing with Isaac. Isaac is like a crazy mad scientist robot who also knows things about Zero that nobody else should know except Wily. So there are hints that Wily could have something to do with this character Isaac, but it's never followed up on. It's never addressed. Same thing with like X5, where Sigma at the very end talks about how he very, very clearly hints that someone behind the scenes, aka Dr. Wily, helped him design his new battle body in X5. But it just gets dropped. That plot point, you never quite understand how Dr. Wily could be involved unless it's through like an AI capsule type thing like Dr. Light's been doing. But again, they just drop it. And they don't ever address how this could be possible. And then the same thing in X6, it's like this guy, Isaac, knows stuff about Zero, but then they just kind of drop that plot point. And then X6 just kind of peters out with them trying to rebuild the world. And there's a whole B story about Alia being friends with all the Nightmare investigators working for Gate. But those investigators have like had their... I don't know if they're... it's such a mess because the localization was atrocious. So you were watching these cutscenes, and they didn't bother to dub them, so the voice acting is all in Japanese. But then you literally are watching these cutscenes, and you're trying to read the dialogue, and it's like a Google Translate. It's like they ran the script through Google Translate. It's so bad that you literally cannot extrapolate what's going on in X6 without doing some like outside research. It's really a shame, and the game just isn't fun. The Maverick weapons are meh. The level designs are really crappy. It's just and really approaching absurdity in some cases. Like there's one Maverick, Blaze Heatnix, who his level literally consists of you fighting the same boring mini boss over and over and over again. And it's a crappy game. It's not the worst game in the X series. It's not the worst, but it's close. But there is unfortunately a game that's even worse in the X series that we're about to get to.
Yeah, and I guess on that note too, well, I mean, what a bummer to know that was the last at the time of the 2D X games, because then came, and I actually didn't even know until way later when I saw some actual gameplay footage of it that X7 was 3D. I think the only thing that I knew about it was that everybody I knew who was a bigger X fan than me despised Axel.
Yeah.
That's really all I knew about that game. But... and of course, as later people have joked to me, burn to the ground,
Flame Hyanord
is which like what a treasure in continuing to use English-speaking actors that live in Japan. But nonetheless, I mean, and from what it looked like, X7 was almost kind of this like not a reboot, but like this completely different thing happening within the universe that. Like, was Sigma even in the game? Was he still the villain? Okay.
Yes, okay. Sigma was the villain, and it basically just, I think it was like set, at least 100 years in the future, or quite a ways after X6, and things are things are just keep going, and basically there's this new syndicate now called the Red Alert Syndicate, who fancy themselves, kind of better Maverick Hunters. They're like, hey, we're going to take on the job that the Maverick Hunters are unwilling or aren't talented enough to take on. So they're kind of, egging the Maverick Hunters on, and basically they're these vigilantes of justice who don't really have the lawful clearance to be going on and doing this stuff, but they do it anyway. They're kind of like like an underground Maverick Hunters. And so this character, Axel, he's part of the Red Alert Syndicate, and he defects because he doesn't like what they're doing. So he defects over to the Maverick Hunters because he wants to help them. And then we get, the absolute worst possible incarnation of X, who's just the most... He's retired. Like, I do like that it's in character for him. By this point in the story, he's retired from fighting because he doesn't, he's very anti-violence. He's a pacifist. And he figures, hey, all these hundreds of years of fighting... all the violence I've committed, none of it's made a damn difference. We're still fighting, so I'm going to take a break from the front lines. I'm not going to contribute to the fighting anymore. I appreciate that. Unfortunately, they took it to this hideous extreme where X just ends up whining for half the game and literally is not a playable character in his own game. You have to unlock X.
Wow, really?
You have to. So
Oh my
you start the
God.
game and you can only play as Zero or Axel. And I think the only way you unlock X is, I think if you there are two ways, if I remember correctly. You can either rescue enough Reploids throughout the stages for X to finally get the message like, hey, maybe I should be helping. Yeah, X, maybe you should. Or I think if you just keep playing through the game, by the time you get to the Sigma stages, or the end stages, X will join the fight by himself, but then by that point, you spent all your power-up stuff on Zero and Axel, so there's really no reason to use him. So it really...
Yeah.
But then, if you go for unlocking X as soon as you can, he's actually by far the best character in the game. Like, he's so OP, and that I like because I love X, but the game is just complete garbage. And that's not something I say lightly. Like, one of my pet peeves in gaming are like, entitled assholes who say, oh, lazy devs, oh, garbage games, garbage devs. I hate that. X7 is truly, legitimately a garbage game. It really, it is so bad.
Well, I will say, having completely passed that one over and not knowing what I was even missing out remotely, I do remember and I think I saw, this is like on game trailers, I remember seeing some early ads for X8, and I can't quite put my finger on why, but that one made me really intrigued for the first time in a while into X, since I just like kind of picked up X5 and just played with it for the hell of it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get this one. So I picked up X8, and I don't know if it was considered to be like kind of the ultimate redemption of like how the series has kind of gone for the last few games by that point. But I really, really enjoyed X8 a lot.
Hell yeah.
I enjoyed I loved all three of the different ways that they designed the playable mechanics for X-Zero and Axel. I liked the characters. The voice acting's pretty good. The story was really interesting. The Mavericks were all like pretty cool as well. So I remember being real enough into the game that I was definitely able to stick with it and beat through it. Unfortunately, I did not do the like hard mode where you get to fight Lumine at the very end.
Okay.
So I've only ever seen that like the true ending on like YouTube clips, and this was like early YouTube as well when people were uploading like very fuzzy looking footage. And then I was like, you know what? I maybe this might be like the thing that gets me into X. And then of course that was the last game of the series.
Which sucks because they redeemed it just in time for it to not get a new game. And redemption is the perfect word for it. After X6 and X7, I was always going to play every new game in the series because, through thick and thin, good and bad, I am a hardcore Mega Man fan, and I love X, obviously. But my expectations for X8 were just zero because X6 and X7 had been just so crappy. And now, I remember, though, when I first saw the E3 trailer for X8, I remember being really hyped because I'm like, wow, they get it. They're going back to 2D. Okay, this actually looks pretty good. I'm like, cautiously optimistic, and then the game came out and it was great. Like, X8 is great, and to this day I still see it as one of the most impossible redemption stories that could have happened, because like I almost view X8 being as good as it was as impossible as like Metroid Prime being as good as it was, coming from a completely untested Texas-based development studio that was being tasked with making a first-person Metroid. There's no reason in any reality that Metroid Prime should have turned out as good as it did. And in my opinion, X8 being as good as it did is almost as impossible, because 6 and 7 were just such garbage tier games. And X8, though, like you said, the production values are great. It looked great. It controlled really well. The soundtrack was fun. I will say the soundtrack wasn't my favorite. It leaned really heavily on metal and heavy, like heavy rock, and that's not really my thing. But there were a few songs in there, like the Primrose stage for Gravity Antonian, which I loved. They kind of got closer to an X4 style. So it had a cool soundtrack, and the story, like it brought back Vile, which is a cool surprise. And it had this whole group, this ocean group, I think it was, of actors who just
that was Blue Water. That was
Blue
the
Water,
G Gundam, the little sister to Ocean Studios.
Got it, okay. But I remember thinking like, wow, what happened? Like they finally threw some money behind this series again, and now I love X8, and the story went in cool places. And here's the thing: they made Axel a cool character. I
Yeah.
very much credit X7's, well, for two things: X7's really bad writing and X7's really bad voice acting, with Axel being as reviled as he was originally. Because X8, I don't think that too many people care about Axel, in a bad way. I think they're like, okay, he feels like he fits here. X Zero and Axel all fit their own comfortable niches, and again, X was super OP, but then again, so was Zero, and that was a lot of fun too. Like, it felt like both X and Zero were made super OP if you upgraded them all the way, and I really appreciated that. And yeah, but then Axel, for his own, he was fine. Like, I liked him in that game, and still to this day, I want to know, what did Lumine do to him? When in the end of X8, one of the last things that happens is that Lumine comes back to life for a second, and like a tentacle comes out of Lumine and smashes Axel's head crystal, and obviously infects him in some sort of way. But we've never gotten that followed up on. I'm still waiting for X9 to answer that question.
Yeah, I was about to say, Lumine infected Axel and made him into the boss of X9. Yeah,
Exactly. And the thing is, though, X8 did such a good job at making Axel, a sympathetic character that I actually liked to see alongside X and Zero, that if that is how it went, I would find that to be really sad and be a really effective use of his character. Like, he comes in, he becomes friends with X and Zero for 7 and 8. By the end of 8, you like him, and then you have to fight him and kill him in 9. That would actually be a really cool arc for his character. And, who knows if it's going to happen. But you know what? I'll say, it feels more possible now. If we can get Mega Man 11, it feels more possible now than it has for the past, 10 years. I feel like X9 is a possibility now, at least, where before it was an impossibility.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I was going to end because we've gone way longer than I was even expecting to. But there's so much to say about all these. I swear to God, I mean, I did the classic one solo. I talked about everything I could think of in 20 minutes, and that this is 3 to 4 times longer than that. And I was like, oh wow, thank God. But no, this is why I'm glad I had you on.
Although I guess in the interest of doing that, I know we've already gone over long, but I know fans will be pissed then because we've covered everything else, if we don't at least mention Mega Man X Command Mission, because that was
of course,
game.
yes.
Yeah.
Which I know a lot of people throughout my high school and early college years of people who either loved it or absolutely hated it. So I don't know how to feel about it. It always looked cool to me. I thought the character designs looked pretty neat. I don't know how it played in terms of a turn-based game or whatever. But did it play? It took place way later, I think, right? Was it 22X?
Basically, they never really quite reconciled where Command Mission is supposed to take place relative to X8 and the Zero series, because the Zero series is supposed to take place in 22XX as well. So Command Mission's one of those things where, yeah, it's technically canon, but it's such a standalone story that it almost doesn't matter where it fits relative to those games, because nothing that affects the rest of the series happens in Command Mission. It's very much its own standalone. It's like the Cowboy Bebop movie, right? It's like an extended episode of the main series that really has nothing to do with the rest of the series. And it's Command Mission was fine to me. It was like the definition of a 6 out of 10 game. It was it was the most generic possible turn-based RPG that could have been made in the Mega Man X universe. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's a fine game, but it doesn't do anything of unique, of note, or anything that makes it memorable in any way, other than letting you play as X and Zero in a JRPG context.
Yeah. Well, I will say that with the announcement of them porting all of the X games to other various platforms, I am interested to maybe try some of these again, because I know that they are, loved by people for a good reason. I'm interested to see what they may or may not do with some of the later ones, if, anything at all, because I'm sure they probably don't want to leave out any of those if they're planning on releasing all of the classic games as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess, but no, on that last note, yeah, I certainly hope that, even just for, there was recently announced that The World Ends With You is going to get a port. I've never played that game. I would like to, but my initial thing is hey, you know what? I'm glad to see that fans of that game, when stuff like that happens, when the people who are loyal to that to a particular series or game or franchise or whatever, get something paid off. I think that 11 is the safer route to go.
Yeah.
I want to share in the excitement of all of my fellow Mega Man fans. I haven't hit that point yet. I think I'm just trying to get there still. But
Oh, you mean in terms of 11 or just in terms of?
11. Just because I'm not like losing my shit yet. I want to be, and I'm kind of sad that I'm not like really really hyped about it yet.
Man, I'm sad too because I am.
Yeah, no, I know, and like my friend Andrew, who's like a huge Mega Man fan as well. Like, tons of people I know are like over the moon, and I want to be. I'm like, no, I don't want to be jaded. I don't want to be like downtrodden about this. I want to be excited about it, but I'm just not there yet. But I'm hoping that with the re-releases of everything, that I'll get to that point again, and find that. That love for Mega Man again in general, because I want to be there, and I would like to, eventually put some, especially because I want to start getting into streaming more. I might try to get some more investment into the X series, but yeah, I do hope that X9 is a thing that. That's probably going to be something that's going to be a lot more of an undertaking than another classic Mega Man game. Because even though they are going with a nicer looking animation style than just more of the 8-bit stuff like 9 and 10 was, doing a proper X8, like I think to live up to the expectations of what people have been waiting for a long time would be a lot more difficult of a task. But I do hope that it happens, even as someone who's not like, a huge fan of that particular series. Like I would like to see that happen at some point. Because even I would be like, I'd like to see what happens, or maybe even how it concludes, or anything,
See, I kind of actually, I don't think it would be that hard to make an X. Well, I mean, game development's always hard, but in terms of how they frame it, I don't think it would be that hard to get X fans on board. I really do think, because it's been so long since X8, and X fans specifically are so hungry now, especially with 11 coming. I honestly think if they Sonic Mania at X9 and they did a 16-bit style X9 that is obviously not only 16-bit, but is rife with the flourishes of modern game development and looks like a modern pixel style 16-bit X game, I think that would win everyone over. And yeah, you can have voice acting, that's fine. You don't have to have it, strictly 16-bit, but do that Sonic Mania style where it looks like a super modern, super just polished pixel style 16-bit X game. I think that would win everybody over. I literally think that's all they have to do, and just of course make it a good game. But I think you do that, and I think you got your X9 right there for a budget that doesn't necessarily have to be crazy.
Yeah. Well, the future is looking, the future is looking like Mega Man will have a future at all.
Exactly.
Again.
Which
so
is
that's certainly nice.
Yeah.
I guess that's really it. So I guess any last couple thoughts or anything you want to share about Exu in general, or
X is better than 0 all the time, every day. You get him in a fight, X is gonna win. I'll defend that position to the death.
I'll act it out in Marvel vs. Capcom. I just won't
Nice.
use my other character.
Okay.
It'll just work.
But no, seriously, I love this series. I love Mega Man, and I would love to see X and 0 together in more games. Because I joke, obviously, yes, X is my favorite, and yes, X would beat 0 in a fight. But more than that, I think X and 0, honestly, are underused characters these days because they just have a natural, they go together, and they're so badass together, and they're such a great action pair in gaming that there's a reason people were so excited to see them together again, finally in the same game, being Marvel Infinite. And I want to see that happen more. Like, people were excited to see them in Project Cross Zone as well. And there's a reason people love these characters. And I do think that Capcom has finally wisened up to the fact that people love X so much, because look how much they're marketing X these days, right? X is everywhere now, and it's not even X and 0. X specifically is everywhere now. Like, they've taken the spotlight off of 0 for really ever since Inafune left, and now you can't really look at any Capcom merch or even games like Puzzle Fighter without seeing X in it. So that tells me that they know what they have now. I think they're aware of what they're sitting on, and that gives me hope that they're going to do something with X in the future.
Well, fingers.
Buster's crossed, right?
Yeah, Buster's crossed, fingers, very, very hopefully crossed.
Yeah.
I really, I want to experience the mega love again, and I think that's even kind of why I'm doing these, is because I just want to like get myself into the mindset of like, yes, like there's hope, there's things to be happy and excited about again, you know, at some point. I think that also probably replaying some of the, like all of these games again. I want to do it all. I want to play the classic. I want to play X. I want to play Battle Network even. I want to play Zero. I want to play all of these. Maybe even Legends, for Christ's sake, if I can find it.
Legends is so good.
How do you think the Legends fans feel when, like, hey, here's another game where we threw in Tron Bonne and that's all you get, Bonne?
I know.
Like, thank you. Anyway, that's gonna do it. So I mean, I'm sure they probably know, but where can they find you anyway? Where do you plug your social medias?
All right. Well, you can find me. I'm pretty boring. All my social media accounts are just my name, which is Ash Paulsen. That's ASHPAULSEN. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram under that name. And you can also find my work on GameXplain, of course. It's youtube.com/GameXplain, where Andre and Derek and I do all sorts of cool video game coverage, mostly Nintendo coverage, but we try to get everything in there as well. And you will see my name in the credits of the upcoming, well, you can see it right now, and if you're a Homestuck. If you played Hiveswap Act 1, I was the associate producer on Hiveswap Act 1, and I'm the senior producer on Act 2, which we're currently working on. So for all the Homestucks out there, I hope you enjoy the game and you're looking forward to the next one, and you can see my work there too.
Yeah, I was once a Homestuck. I have not gotten to check out, other than the couple very beautiful looking trailers for Hiveswap. I should pick that game up, and especially knowing like the journey that team had to go through to get that game done. I'm very, very happy to see that completed. So good for you guys. Cool. All right. Well, I guess in the comments below there, I always have to, every time I have to put the accent on for some reason on that fucking line. Tell us your thoughts, memories, hopes, dreams, aspirations of the Mega Man X series in particular. What do you hope to see out of an X9 if that may ever happen? What were your favorite individual games from the series? Any favorite characters? Any favorite moments, etc.? Let us know if you have any future Curd Blood topic suggestions, Mega Man related or otherwise. I guess I'm kind of out because I've done Classic, X, Zero, and Battle Network. There's probably not enough to do one of the other ones. I'd really have to stretch then for a Legends one even, but who knows. But yeah, if you have any Curd Blood topics, suggestions in general, even if you have to wait 2 years for me to do one, sorry person who submitted this, leave a comment, and otherwise I'll be back to some other interesting things. And to anybody out there who hasn't turned your Kickstarter contracts in, please do that, for Christ's sake. You have like 3 days left. That'll do it. Fare thee well, everybody, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.